Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for Rocky Mountain Institute's Facebook Live event. My name is Jeff Waller. I'm a principal in RMI's Global Climate Finance Program, and I'm joined today by James Mitchell, who's a manager in our Industry and Global Climate Finance Program. Good morning, James.
Hey, Jeff.
Today we're going to be talking about the Poseidon Principles. This is the world's first climate alignment agreement for financial institutions, which launched yesterday with the support of Citibank, Societe Generale, DNB, and other banks. These principles establish a simple, transparent way to integrate climate considerations into the lending decisions of banks to help decarbonize the shipping industry. I'm going to lead off with some questions for James to get us started, and if you have questions, then please leave a note in the comment section and we'll try to answer them. So James, to start us off, why is it important to address shipping's decarbonization?
So shipping is about 2 to 3% of global emissions. That's about the same as the nation of Germany, so it's really quite significant. At the same time, shipping also carries about 90% of global trade. So what we need to figure out how to do in this industry is decarbonize the entire industry while making sure that it still operates as it does today, as this very key piece of the global economy. So interestingly, shipping actually falls outside of the Paris Agreement. So of course the Paris Agreement is an agreement among nations. Most shipping occurs in international waters. So there's a UN body called the IMO, or the International Maritime Organization, which has created its equivalent of the Paris Agreement. I guess the Paris Agreement was established at the very end of 2015. The IMO agreement was established in April 2018. So a few years delay, but nonetheless, it was established last year, and the sort of goal of it is that it requires a 50% reduction in total emissions from the shipping sector by 2050.
And so how do the Poseidon Principles fit into all that? Are they meant to help achieve those goals that the IMO agreement set out?
Yeah, exactly. So the Poseidon Principles are a really interesting way of basically enabling financial institutions or banks to support the ambition of the IMO agreement. So more specifically, what the Poseidon Principles do is, as you mentioned, they are the world's first climate alignment agreement. So this is the first time that financial institutions have come together and said, we are going to align our portfolios or our loans with this climate change agreement. That's really significant, we think.
And so what kind of metrics are used or included in the Poseidon Principles, and what are some of the tracking or enforcement mechanisms?
So the way that the Poseidon Principles work is they, of course I mentioned you have this IMO target, this 2050 target. So if you imagine today we're at 100% and in 2050 we need to be at 50%. Imagine a straight line between those 2 points. What banks are agreeing to do is to basically keep their portfolios in line with this ever-reducing trajectory of emissions. The metric that we use to measure is carbon intensity. So not to get too technical here, but it's grams of CO2, move 1 ton of goods, 1 nautical mile. And so
can you repeat that for us?
Yeah, grams. So how many grams of CO2 are emitted to move 1 ton of goods, 1 nautical mile over the sea?
Okay.
So that's the carbon intensity metric. And so essentially what the Poseidon Principles require is that these banks are measuring this for every single ship in their portfolio, and then they sort of aggregate it up to come to one score for how aligned they are with this trajectory from 100 to 50. So there's some really interesting mechanisms built in to make sure that one, really good data is used, and that 2, it's verified to make sure there's trust amongst all the signatories, and then 3, that it's disclosed publicly to make sure that there's a public element in this agreement as well.
And I'm wondering why finance and banking sector was the impetus for trying to achieve the goals outlined in the IMO agreement. Why not either regulation or some sort of voluntary commitments? Why do you think finance was a useful lever to help spur decarbonization in the shipping industry?
Yeah, so the shipping industry is a particularly hard one. So it falls into a category known as the hard-to-abate sectors, which get their name because they're just very challenging to do much in. So the particular challenges in the shipping sector are that you have tens of thousands of ships, well over 50,000 ships, which you can think of like floating power stations. But many of these ships are owned by very small companies, so companies with 3 to 5 ships, which means that in a global industry that's relatively intransparent today, it's really hard to influence these ship owners. So instead, you have to look for other levers. As you mentioned, policy is one, and there are indeed policies coming down the pipe through the International Maritime Organization, which will be delivered in 2023. So what this agreement does is it basically says, look, the financial sector in this industry is sort of ready to support that and really help implement it in a way that no other sector has said before. And the reason that we have worked with the financial sector here is that they are one of the only centralized levers in this global industry. There's really big global banks, of course, that are involved in financing ships. Big companies that you recognize like Bank of America and Citi and HSBC. These are big global institutions, and they have a sort of global purview of their operations that not many other organizations in the shipping industry do. It makes them an ideal lever for this industry to start bending it towards this decarbonization goal.
And can you describe what the process was like for these banks to come together to develop these principles and sort of commit to this decarbonization effort?
Yeah, so really to describe it simply, it was an unprecedented collaboration over the course of about 2 years. So it started as, of course, just an idea, and from that it grew to an initial list of signatories of 11 banks representing about $100 billion, which is very exciting. Of course, that was launched yesterday, and that list of signatories will continue to grow throughout this year and into next year, which is very exciting. But we also worked with some very close partner organizations. One is the University College London, another one is the Global Maritime Forum. And what we did is we sort of built a coalition of experts in climate, experts in shipping, experts in verification, and then of course experts in banking. And we sort of grew this initiative and of course wrote these Poseidon Principles essentially together in a drafting group over the last year or so.
And is this Poseidon Principles, do you see them being applied in other sectors, or are they really specific for shipping?
This is one of the really exciting things about the Poseidon Principles is that it really puts ship finance kind of ahead of the rest of the financial sector, and also ahead of other industries. It creates a model, and it also creates a pathway for how this kind of model of collective action in the financial sector can be used, not only in shipping but elsewhere. And so we think there are probably a number of other sectors where this could be applied and could be applied quite effectively. Of course, there's always a bit more thinking to do before we go into this, but in general, we think the aviation sector might be very interesting. The asset management sector for utilities could be quite interesting, and the global steel sector could probably be quite interesting as well. So that's maybe our initial thoughts, and we look forward to seeing where this might go after that.
Great. I see we have some additional questions from our viewers. What sort of technologies are we talking about for shipping that can help with decarbonization?
Yeah, so there's sort of 3 buckets of options for decarbonizing shipping. 2 are simple and 1 is hard, but you have to do it. The simple ones are modifications that you can make to ships. So technical modifications like making the hull more efficient, or making the engine slightly more efficient gets you single-digit gains. Operational changes like weather routing, which means going around rough water or arriving at port just on time, again gets you some really good but single-digit improvements. Beyond that, there's low carbon or zero carbon fuels like hydrogen and ammonia. We need these zero carbon ships on the water, coming onto the water at 2030 if we're going to meet the IMO goal. And the challenge here is that you have to modify ships, but also infrastructure, right? So it's kind of the chicken and egg challenge, and that's kind of the next global challenge that we'll have to face in this sector.
Another question is about next steps for the Poseidon Principles. What can we expect in the coming weeks and months?
One of the other innovations of this agreement is that they are actually self-governing, meaning that the banks that sign up to this agreement now govern it through an organization called the Poseidon Principles Association. So not only is it innovative in what it's achieved, it's innovative in how it's run. And so what these signatories will do, now that it's launched as of yesterday, is that they will work to build out the number of signatories, because it's now in their interest to get global coverage of this financial sector in the shipping industry. They will also enter the first reporting period next year, which will be very interesting to watch. We hope and think it will be a great success. And then finally, we think after the first reporting year, there's a tremendous interest in actually expanding this agreement to other environmental or social issues in the shipping industry. That is kind of how these principles have been designed. They're sort of a platform for solving collective governance issues. And we look forward to seeing what issues might be put on the list next.
Great. Well, thanks, James, for joining us today at RMI's Facebook Live event and for your contributions to this effort. RMI would also like to thank the European Climate Foundation, Pisces Foundation, the Overlook International Foundation for providing support for the Poseidon Principles. And want to thank you as well, all of our viewers out there. As a nonprofit organization, our work is made possible by bold partners who support RMI. If you like what you heard today, consider a tax-deductible gift to RMI. You can visit rmi.org/donate to find out more. And we look forward to engaging with you, whether on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course Facebook, and at rmi.org.